Welcome back to day 2 of our SEND conference. I think many of you were with us yesterday, but not all of you. As usual, let's just wait a moment to get everybody into the room. Okay. On to the next slide, please, Fiona. Slightly different cast of NGA folks, the same core team with me, but it's Fiona doing our slides today. If you hear us talking to the invisible Fiona. I'm Emma Knights. I'm Chief Executive here at the NGA, and it's my delight to be able to welcome you all. Thank you for joining us, and just introduce part 2 of the conference. Again, I think all of you are aware of how we run these events, but for those of you that haven't come before, please do use the chat as much as you want to share experience or to ask our speakers questions, because we do have the team with us, particularly Rani, who leads on a lot of our SEND work, who will be gathering your comments from the chat and passing them on to our speakers. And again, do feel free to tweet if you are a Twitterati, but obviously there will be some people that are possibly sharing information about their own schools and their own boards, so just be sensitive about how you put things into the public domain. And lastly, we do know that some people like to save the chats because it's often quite a rich source of information, and indeed we put all our links there too. So you will probably know that down at the bottom of the chat window with those 3 dots, you can click on those and save the chat. So yes, we will be sending you the slides after this event. Can you please move me on, Fiona? So this is the shape of our afternoon. We're really pleased to welcome back Andre Imich, who some of you may know because he's spoken at one of our virtual events before, who's the SEND professional advisor at the Department for Education. And Andre did such a good job that we all wanted him back, I think both delegates and NGA staff, to give us an update. I don't know whether this is slightly awkward for Andre, because at the time we did think that by now we would have the outcome of the SEND review, but I'm sure he will be updating us as to where we are. So I'm really looking forward to that update. After that, you'll have a chance to ask questions. So please do anything you want to ask, do pop that in the chat. Then Claire Collins, who's our head of consultancy, will be talking about the board's obligations in relation to SEND, reporting and monitoring. So that's heart of what you do, and sort of building on where Adam Bodison left off yesterday. And similarly, then Steve Edmonds, our Director of Advice and Guidance, will build on the conversations we started to have yesterday about the board's relationship with the Senko. So that really is quite an action-packed 2 hours. So I hope you enjoy it. And without more ado, because this is day 2, there is absolutely no other messages from me. Let's move on, please, Molly. Oh, not Molly, Fiona.
Fiona.
So we have a poll. That's why I was thinking about Molly. Molly has organised us our multiple choice poll today. So if you could all select any of those that apply, it's very useful for us, for the speakers, to see what your roles are, but also I imagine for you in this virtual room to identify who else is here. So I'll give you a moment to do that. How are we doing there, Molly? Aha. So in a mainstream school or trust governing, 73%, 11% of you governing in a special school, 70% of you are the SEND governor or trustees, but 15% are new, want to know more about SEND. Really welcome to you, because we do know that often our active members are very long-standing members, and it's always great to have new people arriving. So please do feel that you can ask any question you want. You know, it's true of governance and it's true of the NGA. No question is a foolish question. So can you move me on, please? And here we are at the main event, if I can call you that, Andre. Thank you again for returning to talk to us. We're really, really keen to hear what you've got to say about the future of the SEND system. So thank you, and the floor is now yours.
Okay, I've got slightly nervous speaking to Fiona because there's a message come up that says the host has asked me to start my video. Is that for me to do something? Ah, yes. There we go. I think I'm on now, am I? Right.
Yep, I can see you beautifully, so hopefully everyone else can. All
systems go. Brilliant. Okay, well, it's great to be here, and it was a very interesting introductory session a few months ago with a number of you. So thank you for inviting me back. I think we began to touch the surface. Fiona, could we move on to the next slide, the next one? So the next one. Thank you. So I want to cover a few areas today. Obviously, I want to think about the current and future landscape for pupils with SEND. What's going on now? What are the current issues from various perspectives? And how has COVID impacted on children? What are their needs? And the final issue really is recovery. It is a time for really effective SEND leadership on behalf of the group for whom we are all concerned. I will be speaking for a little while, but I will leave time for questions and some dialogue. The only question that I will refuse to answer is who's going to win tonight? Otherwise, I will do my best to address any issues you have. Fiona? I think one of the things that I think the pandemic has done in a sort of rather perverse way has shown the value that parents and children of those in the SEN population have placed on schools. In a way, you take something away and people realize the value and the need and the benefits. And these are some quotes that I've picked up over a period of time, over the last 12 months, from children, young people and their parents, about the importance that they have found in terms of the support from school. And I think it's really important to start off by reminding ourselves how important the school experience is to children and to parents. It makes a difference, and that's sort of borne out by these parents. And I think, you know, it's not often, is it, that we get thank yous, but I think in there are some thank yous. Luke is loving being at school, very much appreciated. Thank you from all of us. The one in the middle is from a young adolescent boy who's in a mainstream school, but he's been shielding for a year. But he's got through it, and it's been really helped by what the school has done. Every day I join for tutor time online when I can see my friends, be part of the group. This time and teaching has been a lifeline and contributed positively to my mental health. These are positive messages, and I think we all need to take them on board and find it reinforcing that the work we do on behalf of children with SEND is valuable and valued. So there's the starting point. Slide. But we do need, in terms of taking responsible leadership and building on the value that is placed on the experience in school, what do we need to think about next? Well, clearly, the evidence, this is a DFE published research from a few weeks ago, last month. The there have been significant impacts on learning and development of children and young people. This is assessment data from nearly 5,000 schools up to January. And the main message is all year groups have experienced loss in learning in reading, and even more in maths. Of course, it will have affected some pupils more than others. But schools with high levels of disadvantage have experienced higher losses of learning than other schools. And of course, one of the key drivers, one of the key aims of the education system over the last 10 years has been to narrow that gap between disadvantaged and non-disadvantaged group. What we're seeing is clear evidence that the pandemic is leading to that aim not being achieved at the moment. Interestingly, so that gap has been widening as a direct result of school closure. Slide. We've been getting a number of sources of evidence about the impact of the pandemic from various groups, our own research, other researchers. This slide is based on some feedback from the Disabled Children's Partnership. This is an organisation that brings together around 80 voluntary sector bodies who work on behalf of families of disadvantaged and groups and children with SEN. What's been their feedback about the school experience? Well, 2/3 rated the learning support offered during the pandemic by the school as good or excellent. So that's 2/3. That means 1/3 was not as good or as excellent. 3/4 felt that infection control was good. Now, infection control during the pandemic has been a major issue of confidence for our families, particularly where children have got health needs. So they've wanted to be reassured about the safety in school and so on, and 3/4 felt it was good or excellent, 1/4 didn't. So we need to keep on reviewing our levels of infection control. However, probably the big issue is the next one. Half of families felt that mental health or emotional support provided by schools was good or excellent, half didn't. And we'll come back to that because I think the issue about the impact of the pandemic on the mental health of our young people is a concern, and the evidence supports that view. Slide. And one thing that I think schools have gone to great lengths to do is to develop their remote learning offer. 18 months ago, we didn't really have much in place, did we? But schools rapidly put in place support through remote learning where schools were closed and children were required to learn at home. And I think we've come an amazing distance in a very short space of time. But there are issues around the way that works for children with SEN, and I think we need to listen to those. And I think we need to be cautious about seeing a remote package as a panacea for children with SEN. And this is typified by this survey of 1,700 parents of children with SEN in the London area last term. They were asked about their remote learning experience and other experiences. You can see there that 13% felt that it met their child's needs, and 42% felt it didn't meet their needs at all. What are the issues that schools need to be aware of in applying remote learning? What were the concerns? Well, we've actually rank ordered them, and the first one is perhaps not the most predictable, maybe. My child does not have the ability to concentrate and learn at home. Children with SEN, actually, a lot of them, that is an issue in terms of their ability to learn, that they are struggling with concentration and so on. And actually, the expertise of teachers and teacher assistants in the classroom is about keeping them on task, keeping them to routines and so on. In the absence of that, parents have found that difficult to cover off at home. So that's an interesting one. We probably could predict that number 4, as a parent, I'm not confident to support my child with schoolwork. These are children who have got complex learning difficulties that require particular skills from teachers and teacher assistants in particular, and we can't expect parents to take that on board and replicate that. So I think in continuing to provide remote education, which I think will be necessary for quite some time, we do need to bear in mind that it won't be right for everyone, or that there are adjustments we need to make on behalf of some of the children who we are planning to deliver remote learning for. There are other factors, but I won't go into those. I just put this up really because I know that you're all, as schools, thinking through and reviewing your remote learning packages. These are factors to bear in mind. How are we making it accessible to all? Slide. In terms of support for recovery, so far, over 12 months, the Department for Education has put in £3.1 billion. And I know there's been debate about is that enough, etc., but £3.1 billion is still a significant resource. It's gone into this early years sector, school sector, 16 to 19 sector, and it provides some of the key packages and expectations about its use is through the National Tutoring Programme. I'm hoping that most of you in your schools have already had experience of that. Teacher training, including mental health focus. I'll say a bit more about that shortly, but we have put in place a Wellbeing for Education Recovery Programme, which has led to many secondary schools in particular being supported to have a lead person to provide advice to other staff and perhaps do some direct work with children on mental health issues. But it's really about getting the whole school to be a supportive environment. There's been a package for early years, particularly in reception, to support children's learning and development, with a particular focus on language development. Many young children under 5s have had a very interesting experience, very limited experience of language enrichment. They're being locked away, locked at home through lockdown. They had very limited chances to speak to other people, to engage in the conversations that are so critical in the early years of language development. So there has been a package to support that in reception, and that's continuing. We've also put resources into summer school programs. There's been a very high take-up in the special school sector. We are responding to the many research findings, including one from Ofsted, that it is evident that children with SEND are even more vulnerable than they were before. We know about their learning loss, we know about their mental health issues. We all need to pull together and prioritise the needs of this group if they're going to make a good recovery. It's not the best of words, is it? But if they're going to pull back from the impact of the pandemic, we all need to pull together. I'm going to move on to wider issues around the SEN system, but I'm happy later to take any further questions on that area. Slide, Fiona. Thank you. So what's happening more widely with the SEN system? Well, what we do know is in the last couple of months, we've produced some important data sets. We produce data annually on the number of children at SEN support and EHC plans. And what this is showing, as you can see from these two graphs, the top one is for education, health and care plans. There's a very significant growth in the number of education, health and care plans. It's around 10 to 11% per annum, and that's now standing at 430,000 education, health and care plans. That's a very significant number. Throughout the history of statements, which many of you will remember, and now with the introduction of education, health and care plans, it's been going up and up and up in the last few years. You can also see that SEN support, it's been going up as well. But interestingly, last year, the rise was not as significant in relation to education, health and care plans. One might predict that they would go up at the same rate. So it's an interesting question as to why there's been only a very small increase in SEN support, but a large one in SEN, in EHC plans. So there are a number of hypotheses one could generate around that, and certainly plenty of food for discussion around the factors behind that. But I think we would sort of summarize and say there have to be some questions as to why we're having more and more education, health and care plans. There's no evidence that the rate of children with the most severe needs is increasing at this level. So there are probably other issues at play here. Slide. An interesting feature in relation to that last slide was about the identification, who's being identified with SEN. And this slide really is some very powerful research from the Education Policy Institute in March, a very extensive and wide-ranging study into levels of identification of children with SEN. And what it concluded was that the variation in SEND identification is explained by which school the child attends, than anything about the individual child. So there's more about the school than there is about the features of the individual child. And that's true for education, health and care plans as much as it is for SEN support. And we do have a wide range of issues in relation to the identification. I'll say a bit more about that shortly. The other issue from the Education Policy Institute was disadvantage matters. There is a correlation between being identified with SEN and disadvantage. So that is one probably predictable feature. However, within disadvantaged areas, the poorest of those missed out relative to more affluent families amongst those disadvantaged groups. So again, some interesting features there about what's going on. If we move on to the next slide, what we'll see is a recent report from Ofsted, who have also looked at issues. They published a report a few weeks ago called Old Issues, New Issues, Next Steps. But they were identifying from their inspections that there might be some inaccurate identification of SEND going on. For example, speech, language and communication needs are often being identified as moderate learning difficulties. So again, one needs to take that away and look at one's population of those identified with moderate learning difficulties. Is that their primary need, or might they be experiencing severe difficulties in speech, language and communication? Underachievement, though, was an issue, that children who are underachieving, sometimes due to poor designed curriculum, poorly taught curriculum, are sometimes being labelled as SEN and disability, when in fact the issues are not about the child, but about the offer of the curriculum, the organisation of the classroom, etc., etc. This was a feature of another very influential Ofsted report from 2010. So again, something we all need to look out for. And they did feel that pupils who are not taught to read well in the early stages of their primary education are particularly susceptible to being wrongly identified as having SEND because they cannot access the curriculum. And I think that's if that's an important feature, it could be exacerbated at the moment by the impact of the pandemic. I showed you the research that shows that reading, children have fallen back in their reading. That being the case, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have a learning difficulty. They may simply need more intensive work and support to catch up as well. So those are issues around identification. But I think if we move on to the next slide, Let's look again at that data on SEN support and education, health and care plans. So this is data about the pupil population. So of all pupils in schools, we know that in England, sorry, I'm missing, this table isn't well presented, I don't think, but I'll go through it, so apologies. So let's take the SEN support table. We've got the data for 2018, 19, etc. So we've got 3 years of data. What we see in England was a rate 11.9%, 12.1%, and then 12.2%. And I've done that, presented that for education, health and care plans. You can see the bigger increase there. As leaders, where do we stand in all of that? What do we know about the relativity of that? What do we know about the local authority in which your school is based? How do you benchmark against that? So, we provide the data, it's on our website. You can look at our data sets, our statistics, and put in the data for your local authority. And then I think it's really important that as leaders, you are able to do that for your school. And then, Fiona, next slide. That table completed should allow for some benchmarking information to take place. So how do we compare? How do we compare with our neighbouring schools? What percent of our school population has SEND? What percent of England? What percent of the local authority? What percent in our school has an EHC plan? And then you can also, because you're providing the data through the school census, you know what your primary areas of need are. What are your categories of need? What's the breakdown in your school of the type of needs you're catering for? How does that compare nationally? It really is, I think, crucial that leaders have this data analysis and constantly reflect on it so that they understand what the data is saying about their pupils and the way their system is operating and the outcomes it's achieving. Similarly, if we move on to the next slide, resource questions. Of course, resources are critical. They're not in themselves the panacea for good outcomes, but they are a critical contribution. How much do you as leaders understand the amount of notional SEN budget that's coming into your school? That's part of the school budget. How much is coming in through additional top-up funding, usually driven by individual pupils with SEN? How is it being spent? These are questions that I think governors need to be asking. If you don't already ask them, and if you don't already have the answers, these are critical questions. They're part of the ingredients to successfully managing a good SEN system. What's the impact of our spend? If we're continuing to spend in ways but not seeing improvements, maybe we should be spending differently and looking at different interventions. So are we targeting our resources strategically based on the knowledge of our school profile? Are we matching the type of needs with the interventions and the way that we're organising support? Is the funding leading to improved progress? How do I know? What CPD are we having? I'm pretty sure that everyone here today is very committed to SEN, but probably that level of knowledge that you have and level of interest may not yet be shared by every member of your large school staff. What CPD, what ongoing CPD is provided by the school? What can you tap into from other sources, from the local authority and others? What impact does CPD have? Next slide. When I met you before, we had quite an interesting debate about the inclusion agenda, and I just wanted to, I'm sure these slides are being shared with you, so you'll be able to access these at source. But again, in the last couple of months, there's been another a meta-analysis research paper published about the impact of mainstream inclusion. And in a nutshell, what it demonstrates is that inclusion in mainstream school is brings about positive benefits for those with SEND in terms of literacy and numeracy, for example. But equally important is that there's no, there are more positive effects or neutral effects on those without SEN than there are negative effects. And I think that's sometimes a concern from some schools about having lots of children with SEND. It will have a negative impact on other children. That's not what the research shows. Slide. There have also been some challenges recently, I think, around admission of children with SEN. And the Office of the Schools Adjudicator published a report again very recently where that office deals with complaints about admissions, and they were reporting that they're having more evidence of some children, some schools being resistant to the admission of children with SEND, both at SEN support, where the admission guidance makes it clear that it's unlawful to deny admission to any child with who requires SEN support, and also with EHC plans. The adjudicator was surprised and concerned to learn that even for some education, health and care plans, schools had to be directed to go through the admission. Slide. And also, I think it's really critical that governors are fully aware of the requirements of the Equality Act, which basically expects schools to make reasonable adjustments to accommodate the needs of disabled pupils. I've put in a quote from a young man who's in a mainstream secondary school. He has no speech at all. He's got no movement. He's in a wheelchair. He requires independent support for all his needs. But he is in the mainstream school. He's following a mainstream curriculum. He's got lots of support. This is his quote: "My school has always strived to include me in lessons, etc., etc." It's really critical for him. It's made a life-changing, it changes his life that he's so accepted and that there are so many reasonable adjustments being made to ensure that he is part of that community. The community welcomed him. Next slide. I'm not going to read all of this out, but you can imagine that here in the department, we rarely get letters of good news from parents. But one came in very recently from a parent of a child who's profoundly deaf. She's a 5-year-old who had just started school. And I think the parent just wanted to write in and say how brilliantly the school had welcomed them, had made all sorts of changes, had made sure there was CPD in place for staff, had moved mountains on their behalf. And I think, that last bit, the Senko at the school has been fantastic. The head teacher, what a blessing. And I think we don't hear that often enough about the fantastic work that's going on in most schools. It is really important to hear those messages. Like I opened with those positive quotes about the support during the pandemic, this should be bread and butter. Children with SEN should be welcomed in this way by every school, but we recognize that that isn't always the case. Slide. Another issue, and I am getting near to the end, and so I will be able to take time for questions, but another issue that I think is really important for you as leaders, as governors and I think it was 73% in mainstream, that's a really good attendance from you. You publish an SEN information report. That's, I think, a critical tool for promoting the good work of your school, for engendering confidence in your parent population. So there is a requirement to publish information on websites. That's been in there since 2014. And to be honest, I never these days find a school that doesn't have an SEN information report. Of course, they're variable. Some are really superb, some do need improvement. And then definitely not all being updated annually. It is a requirement to update them annually. But it is a chance to really promote your work and celebrate success and provide welcoming messages to parents. So how do you rate your school's SEN information report? When did you last look at it? An interesting question if you haven't recently. How up to date is it? Slide. There's 2 more slides, I think, 3 maybe. The links between the SEND governor and the Senko are, I think, critical to the successful operation of SEN in schools. The Senko role is a really tough job. It's, I think they're one of the unsung heroes of the SEN system, and it's really important that leaders like yourselves recognize that, work with them, and give them the support that they need and so often don't always get. But the governing body, there should be a member of the governing body with oversight. Looking at today's list, that's all of you. But the role that the Senko plays is meant to be equally with the head teacher and with the governing body. So I'm hoping that all of you have close relationships with your Senko, that you're able to support their work, provide advice and guidance where necessary, and to recognize the good outcomes that they achieve. Looking at the next slide. As Emma said, we haven't yet published the SEN review. This, for those of you not fully aware of this, this is a government review, although I would imagine Adam would have said something about it yesterday. It's really homing in on some areas of focus. The high quality outcomes, but what we want to do is get that vision from the 2014 reforms working better, which brings in health and education and social care much more strongly into that focus on outcomes. But there is a very strong message about recognition that we need to back mainstream schools to be better able to meet those needs of the majority of children with SEND. And for the small number, although it is growing, of those with EHC plans, to make sure that the EHC plan system is more consistent and streamlined. The review will be published as soon as possible. Inevitably, the pandemic has had its impact here as well. But what's also important is that we understand the learning from the pandemic and draw that into the review. What's been interesting is there's been a lot of more joint work between schools, local authorities, and indeed with some of the external other services. We want to see how we can capture that. So the review team is consulting with senior leaders of the system to make sure doing these reviews, particularly for SEN, these are once in a rare opportunity to improve the system. And we need to make sure that when it's published, we've got it as right as we can get it. What there will be when it publishes is an opportunity to consult on what its messages are. So you'll all be able to engage at a consultation level once it's out. Okay, now my final slide, Fiona. Okay, so at the core of recovery, I think I started by saying this is probably a time where children with SEND need the best possible leadership like never before. We need to make sure that, of course, we are focused on business as usual. We get the system back operating as best we can to a high level of predictability and effectiveness. We need to make sure that we are producing high quality teaching and support for pupils with SEND, evidence-based practice, interventions. And I know there are all sorts of issues about the level of funding. And whatever we think about the level, there is still a lot of money in the system. And are we using it to best effect? Are we choosing interventions that work most effectively? And I think it's something we need to keep on reviewing. What we don't want to do is keep on piling more into ways of working that are clearly not bringing about benefits. We do need leaders to be encouraging attendance. There's still a degree of lack of confidence, isn't there, amongst some parents about child's attendance at schools. We need to be working harder than we would normally to get children into school. We need to be reducing exclusions. It is a sorry indictment of the SEN system that children with SEN are 5 times more likely to be excluded. this is an opportunity to turn those tables. Why would we choose now to exclude a child with SEN? We know the negative impact of the pandemic. We know that excluding children doesn't usually enhance their life skills. Why would we choose now to be excluding children? So we do need to be looking at ways of reducing exclusions. Co-production with parents. The parents are very critical to bringing about positive benefits for children. Schools working with them, writing that SEN information report that I mentioned with parents contributing and co-producing, really critical, as well as helping with individual planning. I've mentioned the importance of the Senko. We need to make sure that we are fully getting their skills and knowledge into the system and making sure that we have ways of operating that bring that out. And ultimately, we need to have an inclusive school culture. We need to be welcoming children with SEND, and we need to make sure that we're thinking right across the board for SEND. People, Senko, perhaps the SEN governor, need to be that person who keeps prodding in meetings saying, but what about SEND? What's happening? How does that policy impact on them? Okay, next slide, I think, is my opportunity to open to comment, questions, answers, and so on. So I don't know how you want to play this, Emma and Fiona.
Thank
I'm
you.
in your hands. I could see popping up lots of questions, but
yes.
I didn't really absorb them. So
absolutely.
I deliberately made some comments to invite debate.
Great. No, thank you. We have Rani and Adelaide, both of whom you may have met, who work on our SEND work, and they've been sifting through all the comments for questions. So I'm going to give you a couple that perhaps group together, and then Rani might also jump in and fill in some gaps. So there has been a bit of a trend around, and it's something that Adam touched on yesterday as well, talking about the schools that are sort of SEND magnet schools, as the expression you used, the schools that have got the good provision, and as you mentioned in as well, there are some schools that are more welcoming. Let's use that language. You did actually point out what the law was as well to SEND pupils than others. So and there were some comments in the questions about how they had seen this happening locally as well. So really, it's sort of, is it fair for those schools that we're perhaps labeling now as SEND magnets that sometimes they lose out in the accountability measures, and it's not properly recognized in the system what a great job they can be doing for their SEND pupils? But equally, has the system really got to grips with those schools that perhaps aren't playing their fair part in the system? That's probably a biggie. So I'll let you answer that before I go on to the other couple of themes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a genuine issue, and there's a whole world which I think the review will begin to touch in, about how we make sure that every school plays their part in meeting the needs of their own community. And again, though, remember that over the last 10 years, the move has been away from government and local authority leadership of the system to school leadership of the system. So we've placed more responsibility on schools to work together on behalf of their community. And in a way, the question you ask is one that actually schools should be challenging each other on. I know that a school will know which of the schools nearby are very welcoming of children with SEND and which are not. Whose job is that? Whose role is that to challenge? And I think in the mixed economy of school status, academy, free school maintained, but ultimately this whole notion of schools being leaders of the system, it is increasingly a job, I think, that schools need to be doing more overtly with each other than perhaps has gone on. Fair access protocols, for some of you will be aware of those in the secondary sector, designed to make sure there's a fairer share of excluded pupils. It's almost always secondaries. some of those have actually worked well, and schools have worked together on that. And we need to somehow, it's a much smaller population generally, thankfully, but it is something that we do need to work on. But I think we need to draw in schools taking more of a sort of role in challenging each other. It does lead to the situation you described. Just one observation. We did recognise that in drawing up the funding regulations in 2013, and local authorities in their high needs budget do have the possibility of providing a school that has a disproportionate number of SEN pupils, because they're SEN magnets, as it were, with some additional resources. And we know that does happen in some places, but it is an issue, and it's one that collectively we need to address.
Yes, that's a good challenge back to us, and it's maybe a good point for me to mention the framework for ethical leadership in education, which many of you may know. NGA was involved in developing with ASCL, Association of School and College Leaders, and many others, and we ran the Pathfinders for a couple of years, and we were really trying to encourage schools and trusts across a geographical area to use it. And that was quite, but you know, trusts and schools individually took it to their heart and used it really well. But it was more difficult to encourage groups to do that. There was a wonderful exception in Warwickshire where they were using it for managed moves, and it really made a difference. And you mentioned obviously the exclusions issue as well. It's almost the two ends, isn't it? Who's allowed into the school, and then who is removed from the school. But I do think it's quite tough to say, actually, that's how the system has to work, by schools, as it were, policing each other. So although a certain amount can be done at local level, it feels perhaps that's something that the SEND review will
be looking at. And equally, as I said, there'll be an opportunity for consultation. And if you've got bright ideas on how to solve this tricky situation, it's delicate, isn't it? But Absolutely. If you've got ideas, please put them forward, because we do want to hear them.
And in fact, I think there were a couple of comments just now as we were talking with people saying that, you know, schools do rather worry that if they get really good mainstream schools at the SEND provision, that actually then they will become even more of a magnet. And that's a really hard ethical decision. Nobody wants to do the job not well. One would hope nobody wanted to do the job not completely well in order that they say, oh, another school down the road is better. But we do know that and
again, just you know, again, I think we have to be those schools in that situation have to be confident that what they're doing is the right thing, which I think most of them are. But there is also plenty of evidence. One of the sort of truisms about the SEN system is that if a school gets it right for children with SEN, it's getting it right for all children. And that's one reason why I put up that slide about the evidence about it, about the impact of inclusion. There's no evidence that having more children with SEN leads to lower performance with other children. I know it's an Ofsted worry from the school's point of view and so on. But the new framework, the inspection framework, is designed to look much wider than pure exam performance.
Thank you. And indeed, somebody's just mentioned that Ofsted could be used as a stick. That keeps coming up actually at the moment, but it always feels like it should be a last resort.
Actually, I read an awful lot of Ofsted school reports that are glowing about their work on SEN. Who's picking that up? Who's celebrating that?
Yes, yeah, that's a good point. I liked the slide you had about the young people and the parents comments. Yeah. You're absolutely right, that some governors will hear that about their schools, but it doesn't necessarily get into the public domain, does it? So there was another thread of comments about, it won't surprise you to know, about money. And particularly the conundrum about the notional budgets. And a point was made by Carol about consistency of funding across local authorities. What can the department do to help that. And also there were a couple of comments about people saying when they've asked leaders for notional budgets, they're told actually you can't calculate them. So can you help our governors sort of do that challenge? How would you address that if you were on a governing board? What sort of questions can you really ask to get under that? Do we know what we've got to spend, and are we spending it on the right thing?
Well, your budget lines should have a line with notional SEN budget. So that should be information that you have at your fingertips. I think it should be in the public domain, but you should be able to get it from your own school. So I would expect you to be able to get that figure, and also the top-up figure. So you should be able to get, not when I say you should, you can get that. So I think that's something to work on. I'm not sure the point is about consistency of funding across schools or local authorities is. If you're in an authority, each authority will have slightly different. Oh, thank you, Natalie. I can see that. Hi, Natalie. There's a spreadsheet available in the public domain. So all this information is available. But for each authority has its own way of calculating the notional budget. But we have to find the factors that it can use in the formula for doing so. So every school in that local authority is subject to the same formula. So there's equity within a local authority, although the method for calculating it differs from one authority to another.
Okay, well, in fact, I know that Carol is far more expert on this than me, so she may well have follow-up questions. So if at any point, Carol, you want to take the mic, please do, because you would you would express yourself far better than I will paraphrase your questions. There were also a number of people asking about examples of information reports, sending information reports, which may be something that NGA can help with. And indeed, one of the delegates then posted the video that I presume it is your own school has produced as information report. But also I thought it would be useful to have your response to that. Is that also something that's readily available and we could put a link?
I can't think of a publication that has examples of good practice. But I'm intrigued to hear that there's a video from one school. Certainly, I have seen videos, and that's such a good way to bring it to life and for people to be able to see what's going on. And just even the way these are presented can make a difference. Many of them are just text. They're just A4 text, one page after another with the right headings and the right information. But you can change that, and some schools put on there the name of the Senko. Sometimes the Senko says, "Hi, I'm great to see you," or something. It'll be pop in any time. Or they put down the name of the team who work with children with special needs. These are things that I think personalize an information report and go and add value to there are headings you have to put in, but you can jazz it up. And I think that, there's a lot, and some people do put pictures in, all sorts of things. So there's lots of ways of doing it.
Thank you. And then actually right at the beginning, but I'm really keen to pick this up because it's a theme of NGAs for this year, the importance of CPD for staff and actually for governing boards, but for staff in terms of school improvement. If we improve our people, as it were, we will we're bound to improve the education that young people receive. And we've been doing quite a lot of work about teacher quality and leader quality and even business leadership quality. But somebody made the challenge to, I think to you when earlier on you had the amounts that we would be putting into teacher development. But in a way I was noticing it as a note for NGA as well, because we haven't done any work on support staff. development, and clearly particularly in special schools, but also with SEND more generally, support staff are such an important part of the workforce, aren't they? Just to tell us a little bit more about what is the approach to that? Is the funding? What can what are your words of advice about us as governing boards ensuring that support staff are also developed well?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't got much more than you've just described. Many local authorities run SEN training programs, and they do it for Senkos. I mean, there's quite a lot of Senko networks in most local authorities, and hopefully Senkos go willingly. If not, I think they should be encouraged to go, but there seems to be good attendance at those. And I think that's an important form of support for Senkos. But a number of local authorities also run programs for teacher assistants and so on. And so I think it is really important to latch on to what's locally available, as well as teaching schools and so on. But I think it is just important to make sure that we keep CPD on the agenda for all, not just teachers who are directly working with children with SEND, because every classroom has got children with SEND, and you never know when you may have a child in your class.
Thank you. And I am watching the clock, but I just thought I'd ask one more question and then just check, Rani, if I've missed a big theme out. But there was also quite a lot of talk earlier on from your data, and I think Rani supplemented it when we were looking at the EHCP numbers, and the fact that actually slightly more of those children are now in mainstream. So there was a sort of thread about capacity there, and again, I imagine this is a big issue within the SEND review, but there was a feeling that, I don't know whether it's universal or certainly in some areas, that the specialist provision isn't necessarily there and available anymore. And is there the capacity issue? What are your
right? You've raised a very, very big question.
Yes,
it is 2 minutes to go. What if you look at the data? What you will find is that every year, more and more children are going to special schools. More and more. We've never had so many children in special schools. And I think that's something that we all need to reflect on and ask, why is that happening? So there are many more children in special schools than there ever have been. So that, however, special schools are very full. There are some special schools here today, and I'm sure that pretty much all of them will say we are full or overfull. And that is another challenge. And that's because, so that's why I think I said, the SEN review will be looking at what's going on in mainstream, because there are children going into special schools who weren't going to special schools a while ago. And as we have more and more plans, it does seem to be that there are more and more children staying in mainstream schools, but that's not necessarily because they should be in special schools. It's a complex issue, and maybe it's something we might talk about again one day.
Yes, absolutely. That's what I'm feeling with a number of conversations. We sort of need a part 3, possibly. And I did notice a few people, with a bit of frustration, understandably. I think we do have that as well at NGA. That the review is again, hence. So it might even be by our next termly network meeting that it hasn't quite been published. But I, really welcome. Thank you so much for taking those questions. Ronnie, is there anything, just before I let Andre go, is there anything significant that I've missed out? Or as always, folk, we will go through the questions afterwards, the team, and we will try and answer anything that we have missed off, and indeed follow up some of your suggestions and queries for more work. But Ronnie, I don't want to have missed a really important point that can't wait.
Now, I think you picked up the main themes. It is going back to the sort of the money, the inclusivity, the engagement, parental engagement, which Andre touched upon as well. So I think we're all good.
Well, thank you so much, Andre, for making the time to come back and being so willing to take questions. As you say, this is a very complex area, and so many special schools will have different challenges as well. But one of the things we were talking about yesterday is mainstream colleagues using some of the incredible experience of special schools to improve as well their own practice and their own knowledge. Yes, thank you for being with us, and we'll absolutely be in contact, continue to be in contact with you and colleagues, but we really appreciate that. So thank you for joining.
Thank you, Fiona, for your slide work. It worked.
Indeed.
Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your conference.
Thank you. And now we hand over to Claire Collins, our head of consultancy, who has, I do believe, some slides to share with you. So Fiona is back in action. Over to you both. The floor is now yours, Claire.
Thank you. And can we move straight on, Fiona, please, to the next slide? And again, I think we know where we are. Okay, we're going to look at what needs to be reported to the governing body and how the governing board monitors SEND provision. When I was putting this slide set together, there were some slides in here, some points in here I was thinking about making, and I wasn't sure whether I should make them or not. It's been really interesting to listen to Andre, because actually I think some of the things that he's been saying, I'm going to reiterate here in a slightly different way. Hopefully that all the messages join up very neatly. So if we can move on, please. You can see what we're going to talk about. We're going to start off with talking about the board's role, which hopefully everybody knows. Next slide, please. And I wanted to start off by saying that, as with many aspects of the board's role, there is a tension. If you could click it again, Fiona, there we are. It's a balancing act, because so many parts of what we do in terms of oversight of special needs is about compliance. There are requirements that we've got to meet, but actually what really drives special needs and makes it the provision, what it should be, is the culture in your schools. And I think that that's something that that Andre was talking about, albeit in different words. And so I'm going to look at that and hopefully have that as a bit of a theme as we go through this. So moving on, next slide, please. When we talk about determining the culture of a school, I mean, it's very tricky, but you're all aware of the board's 3 core functions, and no matter what sort of school or trust we're governing, we have to do it through undertaking these 3 core functions. And one of those is about, if you can click again, Fiona, please, the ethos of the school. And of course, ideally, we want a welcoming environment in which all pupils can thrive. And we identify them not by labels, but by pupils who deserve the opportunity to achieve their potential, no matter their starting point or the challenges that they have in life. Next slide, please. And can you just click through, Fiona, about 4 times? Thank you. So we use this diagram quite a lot, but you can see that you've got what's above the line is what everyone can see in schools. We have strategy, we have tactics, we have plans, and the rest of it. But actually, the real thing that matters about a school, the thing that you can sense when you cross the threshold, is the culture of the school and the beliefs, values, attitudes, ideas, customers, and the way that we do things around here. And for schools that take their obligations in terms of special needs, this is really, really important, but it's much harder to work out how you set that culture and then how you measure it. So moving on, please.
Try that.
So our first sort of test.
Not bad. Let me get rid of this. Hang on.
Well, the first part of this session is we're going to look at the compliance side of that balance scale that I was looking at. So it's about the what. And I'm going to just skip through the next 4 or 5 slides quite quickly, because not that quickly, back again, thank you. As my Irish aunt would say, if we spend too much time on them, they'll frighten the living bejesus out of you. But there are lots of bits of legislation and guidance and requirements that we have to comply with when we're governing. And so these are some of the legal obligations and duties that we have. So there are acts, there's guidance, and there's a code of practice. Next slide, please. The Children and Families Act, it talks about all these things here. I'm not going to read them out, but this second bullet, using your best endeavours to ensure that pupils with special needs get the support that they need, I think sort of sums up what we've got to hold in our minds the whole time. So moving on, that we also have to comply with the Equality Act, a really important piece of legislation. We mustn't discriminate. We've got to make reasonable adjustments. We've got to have an accessibility plan. We mustn't discriminate, harass, or victimize a pupil or potential pupil in all these terms when we're thinking about not only everyday pupils, but children who are particularly special to us. Move on, please. So there are anticipatory duties in respect of reasonable adjustments, and some of you will have had discussions around your governing boards about the sorts of aids and services that you're expected to provide when you get a child arriving at your school who has particular needs. Not every governor or trustee will have experience of this, but when you have, you realise how complex it can be. Next slide, please. And that requirement to have an accessibility plan, again, it's not something that we ourselves will put together, but we are required to make sure that we have one and that it's in place. Next slide, please. And of course, there are some statutory policies. Now, I hope everyone's aware of how to get the most up-to-date list. If you just Google DfE statutory policies for schools, they come up. But the policies which particularly affect special needs, obviously, there's the special needs code of practice, admission arrangements, all of these things. I remember when the supporting pupils with medical conditions came in a little while ago, probably, I say a little while, it's probably 5+ years ago now. But again, that had an impact on us all considering how we support those children in our schools. Next slide, please. And there's a whole host of information that has to be published. And Andre mentioned some of about the report that has to be published, but there also are requirements for what we have to report about what our approach to special needs. There's a checklist for this, which I hope somebody will put in the chat. It's terrifying, but actually a lot of it is repeated. It's a bunch of information which are repeated, but you can tick off and just make sure that you've got, well, hopefully somebody in your school, in your special needs department, will tick off and make sure that all those aspects of your reporting requirements are there. Next slide, please. So in summary, and I think it's important that we focus on the summary, because otherwise everyone would resign on the spot probably, but we have got to meet the Equality Act duties, and we've got to use our best endeavours. We've got to inform parents, we've got to admit a young person where the school is named. We must have a qualified or experienced Senko. All of these things need to be reported to us so that we are confident that we are complying with the expectations that exist to protect the needs of our most vulnerable pupils and students. Next slide, please. And I think that returning to this phrase, using our best endeavours, boards need basic information. And so what you should be receiving from your head teacher, probably who will ask the Senko to provide it for you, is information about how SEND is defined, the different types of SEND, how many pupils have SEND, and that will range from, in your school, there will be staff who are keeping an eye on students to see if they actually are progressing as they should be, whereas those who will have fully fledged EHCPs and very prescribed interventions. We need to know how it works in our school of trust, how it's funded, who's responsible, how staff are trained, how progress and attainment is measured, and how pupils, this is really important for some pupils, preparation for the next stage of their education or adult life is going to be a real challenge. And it can be some of the most, the heartwarming bit is where you see that they are prepared well. Next slide, please. So we have a poll now. All those things that I've just whizzed through there, tell us, how you were made aware, how you were kept informed about send. So Molly, let me know when you think it's ready to share. I hope everyone's able to answer at least one. Are we there yet? Okay, so over half attended training from an outside provider, really interesting. Then the next is actually quite a lot of people are getting their information from their own personal reading or research. Quite a lot with personal experience. That's something that we know with special schools, that people get very involved. Quite a lot who've picked it up as they've gone along, and some who it might not be applicable. So that's a helpful sort of straw poll for us as we move forward. Next slide, please. So moving on to, we've done a bit of the what, now about the how. So this is about moving from compliance to culture. Next slide, please. So in terms of, we've talked about having a basic understanding of what send is, and there are categories of send, and children will be loosely put into those categories, but we also need to understand things like baselining. So when a pupil arrives in a school, is at what point of their development are they? Because unless we understand that baseline, we can't see what sort of progress they're making. And with some pupils with SEND, their attainment and progress is going to be incredibly different to others. So those of you who are governing in special schools where attainment and progress will be very specific to that child, that's going to be very different to those of you who are governing in mainstream schools where you're looking at children who maybe have some mild dyslexia or something like that, where their attainment and progress can still be measured on the standard scales. So understanding how we're measuring progress and attainment is really important. We also need to know there's some key understanding where we have pupils who not only have special needs but have other challenges is really important. So children who are eligible for pupil premiums, so there might be other challenges in their life. There might not be enough money around, their family support might not be there. So that's going to make their special needs even more special, and what the school has support is going to be even more important. It's really useful to have some case studies to understand the journey that a child, that schools go through when they first think that a child might have some special needs, and then seeing it all the way through to, in some cases, an EHCP. We also need to know about the impact of some funded interventions and to be aware of what CPD programs are in place for staff and their effectiveness, because actually we spend an awful lot of money on CPD, but how effective it is, sometimes it can be hard to measure, but if it isn't measurable and there doesn't appear to be any effect, why are we doing it? So there's quite a lot of information sort of in just those, 2, 4, 6 bullet points there, which should be coming to us in some way or another. Next slide, please. I think we might be, yeah. On to poll 2. How confident are you about SEND data? So some questions here about what sort of data you get in terms of the pupils or students in your school or trust, and which gives you the information that you need to understand that. So Molly, when you're ready to share, if everyone's had a chance to cogitate that list, hopefully you can tick more than one. So lots of people, excellent, get data on the numbers of children with SEND. Next highest, you're aware of how SEND provision is delivered. Really good to see that over half are made aware of where there is both SEND and pupil premium eligibility. So this is encouraging. I'm hoping that the none of the above is for good reasons and not for worrying reasons. Next slide, please. Right, this is where I was pleased to see that this chimes with what Andre's saying. We need specific data on things like admissions, attendance, and exclusions, because some schools, as Andre was saying, you don't hear this said often, so I was pleased to hear it. Some schools in the same district have much higher numbers of pupils with SEND. And we need to know where we sit in that. So if our school is the magnet school, great, pat yourself on the back. But if your school is not the magnet school, maybe there are some questions to be asked there. And it's amazing. It's in some communities how people know which school is sympathetic and has the resources to support children with SEND, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If there's poor attendance for children who have SEND, it might signify issues with quality of provision. And then, of course, I hope everybody who's here today understands that pupils with SEND account for around half of all permanent and fixed term exclusions, and that obviously SEMH issues have the highest rate amongst those. Next slide, please. So I've also popped this in here because this is some work that we've been doing recently about how to upskill panels who are reviewing exclusion decisions. And one of the things that we've tried to spell out is that if a pupil has special needs and is being excluded, the panel needs to be aware, which means that the head teacher needs to be reporting to the panel that the specific needs and circumstances of the pupil were taken into account, professional advice was sought, and that there is evidence of the school intervening. So this is a slight diversion, but I think it means that those reports that sit in the bundle that goes to that panel, that's a different sort of reporting to the mainstream reporting that most of us will see on our daily governance practice. But when it happens, it's absolutely critical. Next slide, please. So the important bit about all of this is making an impact. And if we can have all the data, we can have all the understanding, but if we don't use that in the right way, we're not going to see our boards having an impact on provision and making things better, and hopefully for most of you making them even better rather than not better to better. Next slide, please. Many of you will be familiar with our graphic on triangulation. All governing boards hopefully are getting reports from senior leaders, but we need to triangulate that with other information, and that's generally reports from trusted third parties, but there's an element of it as well as what can we see with our own eyes. Tick in the box. Can you click again, please, Fiona? There you are. So that's a sweet spot in the middle where you get that triangulation, more than one source giving you assurance that the judgments are sound. Next slide, please. So in terms of what your senior executive leader is reporting to the board, and so part of that, obviously, you wouldn't expect this at every board meeting, and you wouldn't expect all of it all of the time, but you do need to be aware, made aware of when there are any policy changes and whether there are any things that need to be brought to your attention which involve compliance with those legal and regulatory requirements. You need to have reported to you on a regular basis, probably annually, the numbers with SEND, types of SEND, and specific provisions that are being made. You need to be assured that your curriculum is not reduced for those with SEND. That's a really big challenge, and Ofsted are hot on this, and for absolutely the right reasons. Obviously, you need data on progress and attainment. You also need that trend data, and then you need some reporting on interventions and whether they are making the impact that they're being funded to make, because if they're not, what's the point of carrying on with them? And then you will have, and Andre talked about this quite a lot, is being assured that you understand what the budget is and that it's being used effectively. Next slide, please. Also interesting to hear that Andre was so positive about the role of the link governor or trustee, where many of you will know that NGA has views about how many links there are, but appointing a specific person to oversee SEND is actually a useful use of a link position. And Andre, it was good that he talked about that need to build a relationship with the Senco and build that deeper understanding. We have it with the safeguarding governor trustee as well, but you're building that deeper understanding of how SEND works in your school. But obviously this is a strategic role, and also you've got to bear in mind that you're not personally responsible, that it is still a board responsibility with corporate bodies, and therefore, although the link person will have more information, that there isn't more responsibility on their shoulders. Those visits, reporting those visits, putting what you have seen on paper, those going in with your board packs and going into being noted on in minutes is really powerful, because it shows that you are part of that triangular process. Next slide, please. The other side of reporting, which is really helpful, is getting advisor or consultant reports shared with the board. Many schools have advisors and consultants, specialist consultants coming in and working with them, either auditing or delivering CPD or making assessments about how well SEND is being delivered in your school. Those reports, sharing those with the board is very powerful, because it triangulates, it provides assurance that what you're being told is happening by those in the school or trust is happening by outside people. So there might be confidentiality issues there. You don't want staff or children named. They can be redacted, but having some idea of the quality of provision from that external view is really important. And if it's not happening, it is the board's prerogative to say, we would like this to happen, we would like that external review. And I've popped in there at the bottom that peer reviewing, so where schools work with each other, I'll come and see how you do yours, you come and see how we do ours, can serve this purpose really well as well, especially if you know that there's a school nearby who is doing it differently or better to you, and you want to learn from that, because actually they will always learn something from you as well. Next slide, please. So, final poll, do you get the reports that you need? We can flip that on, Molly, please. Okay, I have a feeling that excellent, right. So that's very interesting that there's quite a low number of people who are getting advisor consultant reports. And yeah, that's one for us to take away and think about. Thank you very much, everybody. Moving on, I think we're moving on to, right. sometimes, yeah, people are beginning to comment that we should have set that up so you could answer more than one question, and we didn't. So black mark against us, probably actually for me, for not putting it on the poll that it should have been you could answer more than one question. But we'll bear that in mind when we're thinking about what the answers were. Right, everybody on the board must be able to question leaders on the attainment and progress of children with SEND. What I've put here is the sorts of questions. I've just grouped them because quite often people say that they find asking questions difficult. So I hope that it's come out of what I've been talking about is that there are some information questions. If you're not getting the answers to these information that are in the first box, then actually you should be asking for them because this is standard information that all boards should get. Then there are scrutiny questions. So you've got the information, how does it compare with national averages? And that was, again, what Andre was saying is that without that, we can't actually see how we might feel like we're doing well, but is it well compared to others, which gives us that element of challenge. And getting that external validation is really important, and understanding if there are barriers to us improving our provision, what that is. It might be money, it might be staffing, getting the right staffing, it might be that our buildings and premises aren't conducive to it. And then of course there's the issue of really challenging questions, and being able to ask those and in the right way is really, really important. These are just prompts for those of you who might find it helpful to think about how to open up that discussion about the attainment and progress of children in your schools or trusts. Next slide, please. So thinking about how we as governors and trustees test our culture, I've talked an awful lot of data and that sort of hard information, but actually it's not all about the numbers, and I think you would expect NGA to say something like that. So what we find out from surveys, and parents, the pupils themselves and staff, what they have to say about the provision of SEND can be quite challenging. It can be heartwarming. It was really nice to hear what Andre had to say about that little girl who was deaf. But again, we need to take note of what comes through there, because this is the soft data that we need to get a grip on. We also should take the opportunity to talk to pupils and parents and staff. Many of us attend events or go on walk rounds. Even if you're a trustee of a multi-academy trust and you're just going on a walk round in one of your trust schools, just stopping to talk to a child and ask them about the provision and what their experience is really valuable. And there is some listening to be done as well. And I think this goes back to the points about why some schools are magnets and some aren't, and how your community will know that, and there will be information out there which you can pick up, which might put some colour on, and the questions that you want to ask when you're back at your school. You know, how come our school has fewer children than one down the road? Next slide, please. So measuring impact. I'm taking this back to our 3 core functions, which are ethos and culture. Is it inclusive as a lived experience in our school, or is it tokenistic? We should be, lots of schools say they're inclusive, but are they really? Are the doors open? Do they welcome everybody? Does our vision encompass all children, not just the high achievers, the ones who are going to make it to the top universities, but everybody? And does our strategy need to make particular reference to SEND? And in many schools, looking at the work that we've been doing, there is at the moment a particular focus on SEND. And from what Andre's been saying, it's for all the right reasons. We have to be accountable for, in terms of compliance, but we also need to be accountable for the progress and attainment that our pupils are making, and using national comparison, survey information. And, you know, if the worst comes to worst, we're having to deal with complaints, but all of those things give us are aspects of the accountability role that we have to undertake. So, and then of course the oversight of the financial performance as well. We need to make sure that the money is well spent and that the resources that are there for those children are spent in the right way. And if governance is effective, the targets are met, which means that there will be better outcomes for all pupils, including those for whom education and learning is a challenge. Next slide, please. I think then that what I hope is, there we are, that line which was tilted towards compliance is more balanced now, as our schools should, part of our role is as governors of schools and trusts is to make sure that not only do we comply, but that in equal balance we have a focus on the culture, and that's the quality of provision for those who have SEND, and that the reporting that we receive, the monitoring that we do through our triangulation and our questioning and holding to account means that we get the best outcomes for pupils. And I think that's it. Next slide. It is indeed. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Claire. Just a couple of questions if you've got a few minutes. So just on the SEND Governor Trustee role, obviously we think it is something that is really important, but there were just a couple of questions. So do you think that if you've got a multi-academy trust, it's wise to have one for each school? And just referring back to the visits that you mentioned, what information should the board be looking for that SEND Governor Trustees then relaying back to them?
So when you say, do you, in a multi-academy trust, do you mean that there should be a local governor who's a SEND governor? Absolutely, yeah. I mean, because what's happening at local level, as a trustee, you can be a very, very long way from what's actually happening in your school, in one of your schools. So say you've got 10 schools, you're not going to know that. So having your local academy committee appointing someone at that level to be having the oversight of SEND, what I would hope is that the information from those 10 local SEND governors is then fed back through the trust level systems, so that you get that I don't want to say colour, but that you get the richness of information about what's happening in your schools. And the second question was, sorry, I'm not a politician, I can't hold more than one in my head.
Sorry, so it was just about, once the SEND Governor Trustees done their visits within the school, what information should be fed back to the board? What should they be looking for?
Yeah, I think that's being able to see that the policies are not only there, that they're up to date, but they're being lived. And so things like understanding the journey that a child goes on from being first identified with SEND can again, it's not just about compliance, it's about culture. It's this is what the teacher spotted this, we worked with the parents, and in the end, this is what happened. And along the way, our policies and procedures helped, supported, and made sure that that child did not fall through the cracks. It's about putting that, it's a more narrative than what we are often getting. We're often getting charts and tables and graphs, whereas this is, if you like, the more human side of it. But it also adds that assurance that, I mean, just to give an example, I went into a school as a new chair. Things weren't good, asked to see the policy. They couldn't find the policy, and when they did, it had the wrong people on it, the wrong names on it. And at that point, you realize that, you know, in terms of assurance, there were problems, and the cogs started to turn. And hopefully that won't happen to anybody who's here today. But if, you know, it is about getting that assurance, and then just a brief report, just bullet points, but it's really helpful for everybody else to see.
Right. Just a final question then. So Adam talked a bit about this yesterday, and it's all about think SEND and how every bit of the board's business should be influenced by SEND. So do you have any top tips on how boards can just build it into general governing body business so it's not seen as a standalone item?
I think that the most powerful change that happened was when it became central to board business to look at groups of pupils. And obviously that happened it was kicked off by the introduction of pupil premium, and we all had to make sure that was having impact. But sometimes I think we can be scared to look at children with SEND, what their results are, what their progress is, because actually it can be challenging. And so it's about saying, you know, making it legitimate that that group of children, that we have an understanding of it, because sometimes it's understanding it's going to be challenging for absolutely the right reasons. These are very challenged children. But unless we face it and make sure that it's on the tip of our tongue the whole time, it's, you know, what about these special children? I don't think that, I hope that that's going to be part of the culture, that the ethos, the culture, the healthy environment in which we're governing.
Great, thank you very much, Claire. We'll move on to Steve's session now. So he's going to talk to us about the relationship between the governing board and the Senko. So yeah, Fiona, pop the slides back up.
Thank you, Ronnie. Thank you, Fiona. And thank you, Claire. Because Claire's laid the ground so well, I hope to move quickly through some of these key messages about building a relationship with the Senko and maximising their impact in the interest of all our pupils. So if you don't mind moving on to the next slide, please, Fiona. And the next one, please, if you don't mind. And if I may, I'll just start with some of the fundamentals, because I just think it helps to start there. All mainstream schools are required to have a special educational needs coordinator, and that person needs to be a qualified teacher. In the majority of cases, they will also have completed a national award for special educational needs coordination. Now, I'm aware that there are a number of colleagues here from special schools today, and of course, you're not required to have a Senko because your teachers are routinely involved in tasks such as provision mapping, conducting assessments, writing plans, etc. Having said that, I hope that you'll be able to relate to some of the things I have to say, because I'm sure that you'll have a relationship, a reporting and engagement relationship with those who coordinate aspects of your provision, whatever particular needs your provision caters for. So hopefully some of the sort of guiding messages and principles that I'm sharing about the Senko role, if indeed you don't have a Senko, you'll be able to sort of take from that. And if you are a colleague who governs in a trust, and I think there are 11% of you here today who are governing in trusts, it may be the case that you find your Senko is deployed centrally to support one or a number of schools, but that shouldn't really change the fundamentals of the relationship that you have with your Senko. So on the slide there, you'll see what that coordination of special educational needs actually means in terms of practical tasks. And I think Adam Bodison said yesterday that there is a mix of operational and strategic tasks that the Senko has to carry out, and that getting the balance right and being allowed to get that balance right, or sorry, having the conditions created for them to get that balance right is a really fundamental aspect of being successful in the role. Can we move on to the next slide, please, Fiona? And I think we've established by now over the course of these 2 days that the relationship between the Senko and the board is one of the most important relationships that we have in governance, because it gives us the insight into how we are meeting the needs of our pupils we send and changing their lives for the better. It also helps us provide us with a common understanding of what send and inclusion actually means in our context. And again, yesterday, that was something that came up in discussion, that we really need to understand that context well in order to govern well in the interests of our pupils with send. And on this slide here, we have what we think are the minimum rules of engagement for a board and its Senko. First of all, can we move on to the next slide? Sorry, those aren't the minimum rules of engagement. Those are the minimum rules of engagement. Do forgive me. First of all, we have the engagement with the SEND governor or trustee, and Claire spoke about that. In some cases, it may even be a committee that has overarching SEND responsibility. But it's really important that individual, or in some cases committee, builds an effective working relationship and a routine working relationship with the Senko, based around regular meetings, at least every term, but more probably every half term. But the relationship between the Senko and the board shouldn't be so exclusive that it goes entirely through the SEND governor or trustee. The Senko should be hardwired really into your reporting arrangements, and attending a full governing board meeting at least once a year to give you an update and an overview on such things as their management responsibilities, teaching and learning developments around SEND, well-being issues, which are obviously very much to the fore in the current climate, and giving you the opportunity to unpick some of those issues and ask questions. And that brings me on to the third bullet point there, which introduces the concept of an annual SEND report to the board. And now this is distinct to the SEN information report that Claire was talking about, and indeed Andre was talking about as well. We're talking about an annual temperature check really that the SEN governor and the Senko provide for the rest of the board, that covers progress towards your strategic goals for meeting the needs of your SEN pupils, and whether they relate to the quality of the provision, whether they relate to budget and spending, staffing and development of staff capacity, pupil voice, whatever those goals may be focused on. We think that annual temperature check is a really good opportunity again for the board to unpick those issues at a more strategic level, and provide the level of challenge and support that drives improvement. Can we have the next slide, please, Fiona? And I think this is our opportunity to take a temperature check, actually, because this is my one and only poll for this session. So I'm asking you, if indeed that reflects your experience, does your Senko attend a full governing board meeting at least once a year to provide a report or an update? That's a straightforward yes, no, or don't know question. And Molly, I'm sure you'll share with me when we've got the response to that question back. Actually, it's not an overwhelming yes. There may be reasons for that, to do with the particular reporting arrangements or the nature of the relationship and the SEND governance filter, if you like. But it is a bit split, and I'm not sure how to respond to that really, because if we move on to the next slide, this really matters, and the best way of demonstrating why engagement with your Senko really matters is to come back again to one of yesterday's themes, and governing by first principles. Those first principles of governance of what we all want for our pupils, our vision for them, and the goals we set to achieve that vision. Again, something Claire was talking about. Now, those specific goals that we have at any one time may be linked to academic progress, physical activity, creativity, citizenship, independent learning, all those things. They may resonate with those, but whatever they are, they should reflect the needs of all pupils. So as the slide says there, the vision should include SEND, or should reflect the needs of all pupils, including those with SEND. So if we look at it in terms of first principles, and we don't mind moving on to the next slide, The Senko fulfills their role as one of the key enablers of that vision. We are an enabler as governors and trustees. We use our best endeavours, as Claire said, doing everything we can strategically and exercising rigour and accountability to ensure that pupils are getting the support they need. The SEN governor and trustees is performing a really important role on our behalf as our eyes and ears on the ground, if you like, maintaining that routine of learning and information that builds our understanding. And then we, of course, the executive leadership and the SEN leadership are making sure that all our policies, the policies that we've adopted, are implemented effectively, but also creating that sense of shared responsibility, that culture of responsibility that Claire was talking about. So, SEN leadership in all aspects of teaching, and not just something that's restricted to the specialists or seen as a specialism within school. So, you know, there are two takeaway messages from this slide. It's that the critical friendship, the relationship and dialogue that you have with particularly between the SEN governor and the Senko, is absolutely crucial as an enabler of as the vision. And these enablers tend to be more powerful if the Senko is part of the leadership team. Now, sometimes limitations on finances prevent the Senko from being a member of SLT, in which case, you know, we'd look at alternative ways of including them as in strategic decision making, like how routinely do they attend SLT meetings? Are they a standing item on the agenda? How does their work input into the work of your senior leadership team? And in some cases, your head teacher may act as a Senko, and that's fine if they have the capacity to fill the role, and if the delegation of tasks associated with the role does not have unforeseen consequences in terms of diluting your strategy and reducing the status and gravitas of that principle of every leader being a leader of SEN. So that's something perhaps for you to reflect on your individual boards. If we don't mind moving to the next slide, please. I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide because I think Claire's stolen my thunder there. But you know, if you're in any doubt of the importance of the relationship, then you know, I'll go as far as saying that without the help of the Senko, you'll struggle to gain that common understanding of what SEN and inclusion means in your context. And so without this being a sermon, I really would encourage you all to reflect on how you actually interact with your Senko as a board, and how they are hardwired into the process of setting strategic goals and monitoring the impact. Can we move on, please? And that brings me nicely back to Adam's 5 strategic influencers of SEN culture in a school or trust, which he covered yesterday. And one of those, as you'll recall, was maximising the impact of the Senko, not just through engagement, but also through effective deployment. So we also need to consider how well the Senko is supported and challenged to do the job you need them to do on behalf of the pupils. So if we don't mind moving on to the next slide, please. And these are some of the things that, you know, I'd encourage you at board level to take a close interest in, whether that's through the conduit of your SEN governor, but certainly having that collective understanding about the amount of time the Senko has to undertake the role. And actually, I think the Senko workforce survey has been mentioned on more than one occasion during this conference. And if I told you the overwhelming majority, 75% in primary and 79% in secondary of Senkos say that they are routinely being pulled away from their duties to do other things. And as a consequence, some pupils are falling through the cracks. I think that's something we all need to take a closer interest in at board level, and ask questions about how the administrative burden's been managed and controlled so that they can focus on leadership planning, particularly if they're not a member of the leadership team. And of course, the succession plan for Senkos, what's the plan if and when things change and your Senko moves on? And actually, that's a very real issue according to the survey as well. There is a significant churn of Senkos that data suggests, is happening now and will grow in the future. So really important, if these things haven't sort of crossed your governing desk yet, that we take a closer interest in them, because they can, unpicking some of those issues, could have a real profound and positive impact on your pupils. So if we don't mind moving to the next slide. Yes, I think we covered Adam's book, and we gave it a good plug yesterday, Nason's Governance Handbook for Send and Inclusion. But I wanted to mention it again, not only because we drew inspiration from it when we updated our Send guidance and published that yesterday, and also that covers the role of the Senko and the board's relationship. But it has some really good advice in there about how Senkos and boards work together on all sorts of different aspects. For example, co-production, ensuring that families are fully involved in decision making and taking a full part in their child's education, and ensuring that they have a bright and successful future. And those things we can learn from our Senko and unpick with our Senko, I think, go a long way to building that understanding, as Claire was saying earlier, that is so much more than just data that we receive. It's lived experience and really grasping context. So if we move on to the next slide, please. And I'm going to finish here because if I've stolen your thunder, Rani, I do apologise, because this is our guidance on the role of Send, the role of the governing board in Send, which, as I mentioned, we published yesterday. And credit to Rani for being the main author of that guidance. And as I said yesterday, we're very pleased with the way that we've covered that balance of compliance and culture that Claire touched upon so well earlier. And we're very keen to hear what you think about the guidance. So hopefully that wasn't too fast to rattle through, that it was lacking any coherence. We may even have time for questions. Rani, how are we doing?
Yeah, we have a couple. Yeah, we've got a bit of time for a couple of questions. So somebody's just popped in the chat. What is a good way to ensure that Senkos get enough time allocation? Because obviously there isn't a statutory minimum. So is there sort of calculation based on the number of Send children in school, or is it a more general approach that board should be taking?
I mean, I can only speak from. I can really speak best from personal experience here. Well, that's experience with working with schools, but also my experience governing. And I don't believe there is an equation for this, or certainly not one that I've come across or seen boards and leadership teams use to good effect. So I think really. Again, and it feels like I'm sort of repeating myself a little bit, but I make no apologies for it. Going back to first principles, going back to your strategy, your strategic goals for Send and inclusion, what we really want to achieve over a period of time, and then carrying out some form of assessment, whether that's through feedback and reporting of how that's reflected in the daily experiences of your Senko, to give you that opportunity really to discuss, unpick, and hopefully prompt positive change if that's needed.
Excellent. And then final question. So if you're talking about trying to balance lots of things today, so another balancing question about how governing boards can retain that balance of being strategic, but also engaging with the Senko and not getting too involved in the operational side of things.
Yeah, I do understand this question, and I'm not going to, I'm not going to sort of be dismissive of it. But again, from a personal perspective, I think this is something that we often get too exercised about in governance, because we have this red line of strategic and operational, which doesn't really exist as a red line. So I think it's perfectly reasonable to build a relationship and a rapport with a Senko, where, as in all aspects, those governing are in learning mode, and are asking questions and asking naive questions, if you like, or questions that may feel naive or appear naive, that really get to the heart of things without saying, actually, this is how I think you should do your job. I think it's really about behaviours and relationships. Again, something I often say, and came up yesterday, it's a people business we're in, and we often sort of, fall back too much on guiding principles or paragraphs in guidance, and don't give ourselves enough credit for how, our ability to manage relationships properly. So that's just my personal view.
Right, thank you very much, Steve. So that's all the questions for today. Just a quick plug of our SEND advisory group. So we are pleased that over the last year, attendance for this group has grown. And so we've renamed it as our SEND network now. So we'll be continuing with these meetings termly, because we really want to help governors and trustees carry out their role in relation to SEND governance, and also give them an opportunity to network with other governors who are trying to achieve the same thing. Next slide, please, Fiona. We also have an upcoming webinar. So this will be about trying to increase participation in governing boards. And Emma will be drawing upon our recent report on this very important topic. It will cover the importance of diversity on governing boards, and offer guidance on the steps boards can take in relation to recruiting, inducting, and also retaining members of the board, which we think is also incredibly important as well. So that is all for today. So all that's left to say is thank you to all our speakers that we've heard from today, the NJ staff that have been involved in planning and delivering the conference, and of course all of you for attending. And for those of you who are watching the match tonight, good luck. Thank you very much.